Hello, hello, hello. Can everyone hear me? I know there's a 10-second delay, so I'll let people catch up. Hello, hello. I am trying out a new program. So let's see how it goes. Hello, hello. Can anyone hear me? All right. It looks like I can be heard. So let me just check here. As you can see, I have downloaded Streamyard, and I have no clue how it works. So this will, in a sense, be another test. That's one of the reasons for doing this. Of course, as the title says, I do want to make an announcement, and then I'll also do an open Q&A. But an ulterior motive is to try and navigate around through StreamYard. So I'm actually going to randomly pick someone here and see if I can add their comment. Look at that, Niles guy, first up in the queue. So now the question is, how do I remove? Oops. StreamYard is great. Okay. I'm a guest on week. Okay. So, all right. So what I was trying to do just a second ago when my screen went black was I was trying to remove Niles's comment. So apparently I know how to put it on, but I don't know how to take it off. So let's see here. We can hear you loud and clear. I don't think we want that up there the whole time, do we? No, it was not how do I remove myself. It was, see, now here's the problem. I see an option on Niles that says hide, and I'm concerned that if I press it, it's going to hide his comments, which is not what I want to do. So Niles, I'm going to press this, but if it hides your comments, have no fear. I will try and restore you to your proper status. Okay, let's see. Niles, comment. Let's see if your comment goes through. Oh, there it is. Cool deal. Looks like I know how to remove the comment. All right. Now, as you can see, I am being a good Christian and bad Muslim by drinking with my left hand. I saw a Muslim the other day that he mentioned that he was, I guess he's mirroring the image, so everything was reversed. And he wanted to make clear for all of his Muslim viewers that he was not drinking with his left hand, since it might appear that way. And for those that don't know, according to Islam, certain duties are specified for the right hand. Other duties are determined for the left hand. And so usually they'll refer to it as the dirty hand. You can find certain videos on YouTube where Muslims will even say that they won't shake a kafir's hand with the right hand. It's the sunnah to shake only with the left if need be. And that hand then is designated for kafirs and other things, such as going to the bathroom. One uses it to go to the bathroom, and you're not supposed to use it to eat or drink with. You're not supposed to use it for any kind of yuck, just wash your hands. Yeah. So I have this video actually on my page, if you haven't seen it, where you see a bunch of Muslims talking about doing certain acts with the right hand, other acts with the left hand, calling it the dirty hand, saying you're only supposed to eat with the right hand, drink with the right hand, and also eat with the right hand, and only these three fingers. So if you're eating rice, you're supposed to grab it with these three fingers. And but in the context of all of this, they don't even seem to notice that they're folding their hands, they're grabbing their hands, they're touching their nose, and then basically transferring all of the cooties that Muhammad said are associated with the left hand to their right hand. So there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of logic there. Now, Muslims, I know I'm kind of going off on a random topic here for a second, but Muslims will often claim that these injunctions of Muhammad have some kind of special insight, either advanced medical insight, health insight, or scientific insight. But when you look at the hadith, the rationale that's given for these things has nothing to do with all of the things that Muslims have trumped up in an effort to make Muhammad look like he had some advanced knowledge about certain things. And of course, there's no special wisdom associated with the left hand anyways. But they do try and extrapolate this from other things that Muhammad said to do, like sleeping on your right side, they'll say has better health benefits. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but the point is that when you look at the hadiths and you look at the rationale that Muhammad gave for these things, it has nothing to do with any of that. The reason that Muhammad said you're only supposed to eat with the right hand and not eat or drink with the left hand is because Satan eats and drinks with his left hand. So you can't be like Satan, therefore you're not supposed to do that either. But of course, the whole idea that Satan eats and drinks is just a Islamic fiction. Satan's not an embodied being. And some of this has to do with Muhammad's, false pagan background, belief in jinn. The Arab jinn were not exactly, the counterparts of the biblical teachings regarding angels or fallen spirits and so forth. So, so lefty writing people are doomed. All right. Well, I can't tell from this Streamyard how many people are here and if it's a good point to make any kind of announcement. But somebody did ask me, so I'll wait a little bit. I thought somebody asked me back a little bit. Let me scroll back and see. There was an interesting question, I thought. I'll try and be a little better today about keeping track. Here we go. Jeremiah asks, "What are you currently studying?" That's a difficult question to answer because I go in a number of directions. You may not know that I have numerous jobs. My main vocation, what I'm working into, is I work for a ministry called Metanoia, which is the Greek word for repentance, and it's the name for a prison ministry that's associated with the denomination of which I'm a pastor. And so in that denomination, we have a special group that's dedicated to focusing on ministry towards prisoners. And I was appointed the regional director in South Carolina for prison ministries. And since it's a missionary position, ordinarily a pastor is supported by the local congregation that he serves. And that means that if you're a missionary, you aren't being supported by a particular church. You're necessarily then at the mercy of a group of churches to get behind you and support the work. So part of what I have to do is go around to churches throughout South Carolina, tell them what I do, ask them to support the work that I'm doing. And what happened was I started in earnest at the beginning of this year, going around to churches, raising support, and then COVID struck. So I didn't reach full support before COVID struck. And the goal in reaching full support was so that I could stop doing some of the other jobs that I do. Another job that I do is I work for a theological ministry that provides Christian resources, books, and devotionals and all those sorts of things. And they have a theological chat service. And so I am one of their theological chat agents. People write in questions and then I answer them live in text. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to sort of be in a position to no longer do. However, because I didn't reach full support yet in the prison ministry, I still have to continue doing that. And I have other jobs as well. And the reason for bringing all that up in relation to Niall's question is because these different duties bring with it different areas of focus, things that I have to look at. So for the prison ministry, I'm doing ordinary stuff like a pastor would do, studying relevant things related to anything I might be preaching. So currently I've been preaching through John. So I've been reading a number of commentaries on John's Gospel. One really good commentary is by D.A. Carson. So D.A. Carson is a well-known, well-regarded biblical scholar and theologian, and his commentary on John is exceptionally good. So if you're looking for a good commentary on John, that's one that I'd recommend. That's definitely in the upper echelon of commentaries. It's not too technical, not too difficult. He does break down certain things, but he doesn't try and shoot over the stars. And then, of course, I have ongoing interest in Islamic apologetics. Currently, I've been reading through Ahmed bin Hanbal's Musnad, which is, for those that don't know, there are various hadith collections. The most famous, of course, are the six. And of the six, the most famous are Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. However, while those are the most famous because they contain what most Muslims believe are exclusively Sahih narrations. A Sahih narration is a sound and authentic narration. While they contain Sahih narrations, they're not the only collections that contain Sahih narrations. Bukhari, I can't remember the exact figure, but it was in the hundreds of thousands. It might have been something like 300,000 hadiths he collected and sifted through. And out of those hundreds of thousands of hadiths, he chose 7,000 to include in his collection. But the same criteria that he used to select those narrations are used by Muslims to grade other narrations not found in Bukhari's collection. And so you can find other Sahih narrations in other hadith collections, even hadith collections beyond the standard six. And so I've been reading through Ahmed bin Hanbal's Musnad. Now, Ahmed bin Hanbal is famous for being the founder of one of Islam's four madhabs, its schools of jurisprudence, and also for being a representative of a particular view of Akita, which is sometimes called the Athari school. The Athari school of Akita is typically the form of creed that's held by Salafi Muslims. So if you're talking to a Salafi Muslim, often his position on matters of theology would go back to somebody like Ahmed bin Hanbal. And so his Musnad, which is, it's another way of referring to his collection of hadiths. And they're arranged differently. One of the interesting things about his arrangements are that he doesn't, if you look at Bukhari, he usually collects and arranges things according to certain topics. And that's helpful in its own way. But Ahmed's Musnad actually arranges things according to the narrators. And so you'll get all of the hadith narrated by Abu Bakr, all of the hadith narrated by Umar, all the hadith narrated by Uthman, all the hadith narrated by Ali, and so on and so forth, through Abu Huraira, Aisha. And what's helpful then is you can either remember things as something that was reported by this individual, and so it's helpful in that way, but also when you see certain conflicts in hadiths, it's helpful to know this narrator was the person who held this position and this person held that position, because sometimes those differences that appear in one hadith are relevant to the interpretation of another hadith. So there's all sorts of value to that sort of thing. But another thing that I'm studying is I'm currently reading, actually, and quite enjoying, for those that are interested, this is the third volume of the Ananisene Fathers. I've read this before, but I'm going back through the Fathers for various reasons. But currently I was reading again Tertullian. So the third volume is all the writings of, well, it includes Tertullian's writings. The next volume also includes some of Tertullian's writings as well. But sometimes in the volumes you get, because one father may not have written enough to fill a whole volume, so sometimes you'll get multiple fathers. So, for example, the what are called the Apostolic Fathers, those are the fathers in the first century after Christ, so the second century. Their writings fill one volume. So you'll get men like Clement of Rome, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and so forth, Mathetes in that first volume. But Tertullian, we have a great deal more from. So his writings fill this volume and take up a major part, I think, of the next volume, volume 4. So I've been reading Tertullian's Apology, and his Apology. So Tertullian is known as a second century, or into the third century apologist. And one of the things he's doing, a main thing he's doing in the Apology is defending Christians against Rome, because of course Christians were still being persecuted by Rome at the time. And so he's actually criticizing Roman religion, showing the superiority of Christianity to Roman religion, pointing out the irrationality of persecuting Christians. And there's a number of things in here that are brilliant. And so one of the things I'm thinking through is the potential application of some of this to other groups in our own day. The issue of persecution is not as rife, at least in America. It is for Christians in other places, but certainly for all Christians everywhere, the defense of the truth of Christianity and the vindication of it over and against various pagan ideas is certainly relevant. Even though Islam claims to be in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we shouldn't be deceived simply by words, right? In substance, Islam is nothing but baptized paganism. The Islamic deity is nothing but a pagan deity. Muhammad tried to smuggle in some Christian ideas, make things look in some ways congenial to the religion of the prophets and the apostles, but in substance, it's not at all true, right? It's not authentically a religion of pure monotheism. So what else am I reading? There's always a bunch of stuff that I'm reading, and I get distracted with different things. Truth Defenders here can tell you that I send him quotes sometimes as I'm reading stuff. He's a friend that I know from various ministry stuff and hanging out and so forth, and in other connections. He will tell you he is my bodyguard when I do debates. There was one debate I did several years ago in Arizona, and everybody was required to leave their bags outside. And this one guy came in off the streets. He had this backpack. He refused to leave it outside. They were also using a metal detector, and he refused to submit to the metal detector. And so I was actually up debating a Muslim, and this guy comes barging in through the doors, and truth defenders here did a football tackle, rushed him out the door, and then the guy took off down the street. So no idea what his motives were, what his intentions were, but so Gerald here says that Tertullian is Muhammad Hijab's favorite church father. Yeah, in that debate, my goodness, there were so many times when he was saying stuff and saying them with such pomp and bravado, like, he was just cocksure of the truth and the certainty of what he was claiming. And I couldn't believe how wildly false so much of what he was saying actually was. He was criticizing David at various points for making comments about the Arabic, and there are two ironies here. On the one hand, as most of you know from some of our follow-up videos, he ended up actually agreeing with David, but misrepresenting what he claimed David was saying, right? So he actually confirmed that David's statements were right, even though David would be the first to tell you he doesn't know Arabic. But David certainly did his homework, and so hijab became a laughingstock for many. I've even seen people have T-shirts. For those that didn't see that debate, one of the things David pointed out is that there are certain things in the Islamic sources that say Allah prays for Muhammad or upon Muhammad. And Muhammad Hijab came and corrected David and said, Allah does not pray to Muhammad. It says for, not to, right? But of course, that's what David said. He said for Muhammad, not to Muhammad. So that's the first irony, that he tried to correct David by agreeing with David while misrepresenting David. So he ends up butchering his own Arabic language. But he's criticizing David for making comments about Arabic, and yet he turned around and was making all sorts of comments about Hebrew, and yet I counted at least 3 times where he butchered the Hebrew. And I've seen him do this on numerous occasions. If he did it only once, like the first example was his misquotation and mistranslation of Deuteronomy 6:4. Deuteronomy 6:4 is the Shema, and he cites it as Shema Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and I wouldn't fault him here. That's how Jews say it today. However, we know that Jews are doing that because they don't want to say the divine name. The actual quote is Shema Yisrael Yahweh Eloheinu Yahweh Echad. But so the reason that I criticize him for misciting it, on the one hand, is number one, it shows that he's not actually getting this from the text. He's just hearing Jews say this. But two, really because he mistranslates it. And it's not as if the translation in this case was a gross mistranslation, but again, it just shows his ignorance, right? He's pontificating about something he doesn't really know, all the while criticizing David for commenting on Arabic when David wasn't even wrong about the Arabic. So I thought that was noteworthy. But the more noteworthy error that he committed was when he said that the name Elijah means God with us. But of course, Elijah doesn't mean God with us. The divine name there is not the El at the beginning. The word El in Hebrew is God, but in this case, it says Elijah, meaning my God is Yahweh, right? It's a contracted form of the divine name. So Elijah doesn't mean God with us. It means my God is Yahweh. And then there was a third error, and I can't remember what it was. But of course, along with that was his butchering of the early church fathers. The early church fathers, he was asking David to provide a quote from the early church fathers on the spot. That's sort of a ridiculous challenge. I'm not saying no one can do it, but the idea that David is supposed to be lugging around, dozens and dozens of volumes of the church fathers. I mean, they comprise at least the ones that are translated in English, comprise, several dozen volumes. He didn't go to the debate bringing all that with him. It's kind of ridiculous to think that he's supposed to quote a church father on the spot. But more than that, I mean, he's challenging him on something that's easy to discover. It's not as if it's difficult to find Tertullian or others calling Jesus God. In fact, I holding Tertullian in my hand, in his apology, what I just made reference to, he refers to Jesus as God numerous times. Let me give you an example. So actually, here's a quote. There are better quotes than this, but this one says, "We worship God through Christ." He goes on to say, "Count Christ a man, if you please. By him and in him, God would be known and be adored." So what he's first doing here in context is he's saying, okay, count him just a man. You shouldn't on that count reject our religion, because other religions were revealed through men, or believed to have been revealed through men. The Jews believed that Old Covenant religion was revealed through Moses. He makes that point. And then he talks about Roman beliefs and so forth being revealed through certain people. And then he goes on to say, "Surely Christ then had a right to reveal deity, which was in fact his own essential possession." So now he's moving from an argument from the lesser to the greater. He's saying, if you accept religions as valid, that men were used to convey to the world, then you shouldn't reject Christianity merely because a man revealed it, even if you take Christ to be nothing but a man. But then he says, all the more then should it be accepted on the grounds that Christ possesses deity as his own essential possession. And then he goes on to argue for this. So he argues for that. He doesn't just assert it. But here's another quote from Tertullian from his apology. He says, he's talking in context about the notion of God's logos. And then he says, "We have been taught that he, the logos, proceeds forth from God, and in that procession he is generated, so that he is the Son of God and is called God from unity of substance with God. For God too is spirit." And then he goes on, he gives sort of an analogy. And then he says, "Thus Christ is spirit of spirit and God of God, as light is kindled from light." Now, anybody who hears that should recognize this sounds just like the language of Nicaea, right? The claim of anti-Trinitarians, including people like Muhammad Hijab, is that this belief didn't come along until the 4th century at the Council of Nicaea. And yet, not only do we hear Tertullian emphatically affirming Christ's essential deity, but he's even using language at this time, long before Nicaea, that would later come to be used to support or articulate the Orthodox position. Later, he says, "In this way also he is spirit of spirit and God of God. He is made a second in manner of existence, in position, not in nature." Right? So the point that Tertullian is making is that Christ is functionally or positionally second to the Father, not by nature, right? There's an order of subsistence by virtue of the Son being the Word of the Father, the eternal Word who eternally proceeds from the Father. He is, even though this is eternal, there is a logical, priority to the Father in the sense of his position, but not in terms of his nature or essence. And so, oh, another thing about Muhammad Hijab, which again just had me, bewildered, was David made the observation in that debate that according to the Islamic sources, Allah has anatomical features. Right now, this is a subject that I've talked about on Acts 17 Apologetics numerous times. I have numerous standalone videos, but I also did several videos with David after that debate. And in the debate, Muhammad Hijab pretended like David was just making something up, and he kind of got away with it in the sense that he just dismissed it like nobody says that, engaging in clear active deception. because the Islamic sources are replete with references to Allah's anatomical features, right? I mean, they talk about Allah's face. They talk about his eyes. They talk about his mouth. They talk about his hands, his fingers, his fingertips. They talk about his elbow. There are even hadiths that talk about the fact that Allah appears like a beardless youth. There are hadiths that talk about Allah's gonads, his loins. One of my favorite hadiths, I haven't done a video on this yet, but I do plan to do so at some point. There's a hadith that talks about Allah creating the womb, which in Arabic is rahim, right? And according to the hadith, when Allah created the womb, rahim, the womb reached up and grabbed Allah's gonads, and then Allah said, "What are you doing?" And basically, I mean, and then there's a conversation that ensues after that. Basically, the womb is trying to petition Allah to do something for it, like, in other words, bless those who keep their ties of kinship. So, anyways, the Islamic sources are. Sahih Luke says he's working on a video regarding Allah entering creation. Yeah, that might be a good little topic here. Salafi say that Allah's hands and feet are literal, but Mimi rejected that. And yeah, they certainly do. I mean, and by the way, Ahmed bin Hanbal was one of the foremost proponents of that. In the history of Islam, there were certain schools that, in the early centuries that began to emerge. One school was known as the Traditionist School. The Traditionist School refers to those who clung to the prophetic hadiths, the narrations of Muhammad, as necessary to interpret the Quran and properly understand it and so forth. And in the hadiths, you have a lot of the explicit references to Allah's anatomy. Now, you find it in the Quran too, right? It's just that the Quran doesn't get into the details, just like it doesn't get into the details on a lot of the other issues, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. In Surah 38:75, you have one of those many texts where the angels are commanded to worship Adam, and Satan is upbraided by Allah for not worshiping Adam. But in Surah 38:75 in particular, it gives you a reason why Allah was so upset with Satan, and why Satan should have quickly and willingly submitted himself to Adam and worshipped him. And but so in the passage it says, why didn't you bow down to the one I created with my own two hands? Okay. Now this is significant because, in the Bible, you can have, we recognize that you can have figures of speech, right? In the Bible, it says, for example, in Psalm 19:1, it says that the heavens declare the glory of God and the skies proclaim the work of his hands, right? Everybody recognizes that's poetic language. It's a figure of speech. Nobody would take that literally. However, there are other passages in the Bible that make reference to hands, and they have to be understood, like when it talks about, when John says, 1 John 1:1, when he says that which was from the beginning, that which we have seen with our eyes, touched with our hands, he's obviously literally using the term hands there. You can't write that off as a figure of speech. So there are figures of speech. There are also literal uses. So the question becomes, in what sense is the Quran using the term hands in Surah 38:75? Well, it should be obvious from the text itself that this can't be a figurative usage, because elsewhere when the Quran uses the term hands figuratively and talks about Allah creating things with his hands, that's interpreted in the Quran as Allah creating things by his power, right? He simply speaks and all things come into existence. But Satan in Surah 38:75 is specifically being rebuked because he refused to bow down to the one Allah created with his own two hands. Now, if Satan should have bowed down to Adam because he was created with Allah's two hands, then that seems to suggest that there's a different sense in which Allah is speaking of his two hands here. In fact, he even emphatically says, my two hands. He doesn't just say my hands. He says my two hands, specifying the number. Yeah, Jamie, real quickly, Jamie says, hey, Anthony, I got no notification. I was looking at that and I'm not sure if it's because I don't know what I'm doing, if it's because I am trying out Streamyard. For whatever reason, when I would go and look to see if it was showing people, I couldn't see it myself, and so I'm not sure what the reason was for that. Okay, so Gerald says he got a notification email, so maybe if you are not only subscribed but also hit the thing for notifications, that'll help. I don't know. I'm a novice when it comes to this sort of thing. Normally David is doing all the technical stuff, so I'm sort of flying solo here on this. But so yeah, so the here in Surah 38:75, it seems to be distinguishing Adam from the rest of creation, and it's distinguishing him as an object that Allah created with his own hands. Well, when you look at the hadith, it becomes very clear that that's how it's being used. It's being used literally. In the hadith, you have narrations that say things like, there are only 4 things that Allah created directly with his hands. Adam was created with Allah's hands. Allah created or planted the trees of the Garden of Eden with his hands. He created the pen with his hands. Really bizarre thing to say Allah created, in some special way, the pen. And then a 4th thing is that he wrote the Torah for Moses with his hand. So that's one hadith that very clearly indicates that the sense in which it's referring to Allah creating Adam with his hands literally means hands. This is distinguished from the way Allah created everything else. Next, you have hadiths where we're told that people on the Day of Judgment, they're going to be standing there and their fear is going to be increasing the longer they're waiting for Allah to appear and to judge them, because everybody's going to be standing in this area, that stretches on for who knows how far. All people who have ever lived are going to be standing there waiting for Allah to appear. And some of the Islamic sources say that this day is going to last 50,000 years. So as this period drags on, people are going to become so anxious, so fearful, that they're going to start seeking out various people to intercede for them with Allah. And first, they're going to go to Adam. And they're going to go to Adam first because they say, you're the one that Allah created with his own 2 hands, right? So they think that Adam has some special approach unto Allah, that they're going to him in order to get Allah's approval. And then Adam says, I sinned against Allah, go to Noah. And on it goes until all the prophets end up saying, you don't turn to me, I can't help you, go to Muhammad, right? You could all probably anticipate where that hadith was going. Far be it from Muhammad to miss an opportunity to exalt himself over the prophets. So there's a second narration. By the way, in that hadith, each prophet is singled out for some special reason, right? Abraham is singled out as the one who was the friend of Allah. So they're going to him thinking, okay, he can intercede for us. When Abraham turns them away, then they go to Moses and they say, you're the one that Allah wrote the Torah for with his own hand, right? So you have another reference to Allah's hand. So again, you have this second narration that makes it very clear that we're talking about a literal hand. Third, we're told that if you look at Surah 7, I think it's 172 of the Quran, Surah 7, 172, it says that, actually, let me grab it here to make sure. This is my Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran. Yeah, Surah 7:172. Here's what it says. It says, when thy Lord drew forth from the children, or the children of Adam from uh, his loins, their descendants, and made them testify concerning themselves, am I not your Lord? And then it goes on. This is an awkward translation of this verse. Basically, what it's talking about is it's saying when Allah created Adam, he brought forth from Adam's loins all of his descendants and made them stand before him and acknowledge him as the only God. And so when you hear Muslims talk about what's called fitra, right? They very rarely go into the details of this, but the details are embarrassing. I have an interesting story about this fitra notion in a minute, but first let me tell you what fitra means. Muslims will say that everybody is born a Muslim, meaning they know that there's only one God, they know Allah's God, and so that's their natural disposition, is to believe in one God and to worship him only. The reason, according to the hadith, that people end up worshiping other things or forsaking Allah or worshiping things in addition to him is because their parents make them a Jew, a Christian, or a polytheist, right? So their natural bent, their natural disposition is towards Islamic monotheism. But they go astray not because they're fallen, not because they're sinful by nature and man naturally suppresses the truth, but because other people are the catalysts for their waywardness. Well, so if you look at the hadith on this narration, it actually gets into the details. How is it? I mean, because you might hear that notion of fitra and think this makes sense in terms of its what we believe as Christians, right? We believe that everyone knows that God exists in some sense, right? Romans 1, well, first of all, Psalm 19, the text I quoted a minute ago. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day unto day pours forth speech. Night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their word has gone out to the ends of the earth. Okay, what this psalm is saying is that God pours forth revelation or knowledge of himself through the created world, right? So that all people who are in the world have heard of his existence, not through an audible voice, but through that glory that's on full display before the eyes of all men. Now, Paul fills this out in Romans 1 when he goes on to say that the wrath of God, right? Romans 1:18 and following, he says, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, right? And that unrighteousness that he's talking about, that suppression, is a suppression of the clearly revealed knowledge of God that God has given to all men, right? You can read the context there. He's saying that God has made himself known to all men, but people are not only created in God's image such that they should recognize him through the work of his hands, and are without excuse when they refuse to do so, but they're also sinful, so they suppress that clearly revealed knowledge of God, and that's why all men are condemned. When somebody asks you the question, what happens to people who have never heard, don't get confused here. It's a mistake to say that people are condemned for not believing in Jesus. Now, there's a sense in which that's true, but let me just carefully nuance this here. The reason people are condemned is because of their sin, right? That has nothing to do with whether they believe or don't believe in Jesus, right? They're condemned for their sin, right? Jesus is not the basis of condemnation. He's the way of salvation, right? Jesus said, I didn't come into the world to condemn it, but to save it, right? So Jesus, it's not because people don't know Jesus that they're going to hell, in the sense that the grounds of their condemnation is their sin. Now, people are going to hell for not believing in Jesus in this additional sense that if they need to believe in him or else they can't be saved. So, but that's not the same thing as saying, that they're being condemned for not doing something they didn't have the possibility to do. They're being condemned for doing what they knew not to do, for not glorifying God, not giving thanks to God. And because if they've heard of Christ, it would be an additional sin not to exercise faith in him. So their condemnation becomes greater if they've heard of Jesus and don't believe in him. But properly speaking, Jesus is the way of salvation, not the means of one's condemnation. So you have to carefully nuance it. There's a sense in which it's true and not true that people are condemned for not believing in Christ. But anyways, back to Romans 1, Paul says that all men know God, they're without excuse for their rejection of him. And so the basis for this for Christians is that God created all men in his image. So our very natures are themselves revelatory of God. Our very natures reveal the true God. We are his handiwork, right? And we can't escape ourselves. We can't escape being confronted all the time with the revelation of God that our very natures, testify to. But we're also surrounded by God's creation, which testifies to his glory, his goodness, his righteousness, and so forth. So that's the reason that Christians would say that all men know God and are without excuse for rejecting him and suppressing the truth about him. But according to Muslims, here's what's happened. In Surah 7, 172, it says that Allah took people out of the loins of Adam before we were ever born and made us stand before him and testify to his exclusive deity. And this was so that people would not have any excuse. But think about it. Does anybody have any recollection of that? Is there any recollection of that event? I remember, years ago, some of you may not know what Mormons teach. I was debating with a Mormon in a prominent LDS town, and there was a big LDS event, Latter-day Saint event, next to one of their temples. And he was debating with me about how we get to heaven, and then he started questioning me about what heaven is like. And so Mormons believe, and he apparently, lost sight of this, but Mormons believe that we actually existed before coming into the world, right? They say that the God of this world, who's only one God of many, right? He has a God above him, who has a God above him, who has a God above him, right? It's turtles all the way down, to use the old Hindu proverb. Or is that Muhammad? I'm not sure who came up with that first. Anyways, so they say that God the Father is a physical man who himself was exalted to godhood at one point, and he has a goddess wives, and through their relations, right? They have sex, right? They engage in whoopee, and through this act they produce spiritual offspring, right? So these spiritual children are the people who eventually get a body in this world. So when you have a child with your spouse, what's happening is you're sort of providing a body, but then these souls are being put into those bodies. So this means that these souls existed in heaven before they existed on earth. And one of the things that Mormons say is the reason that babies cry when they're born is because you've got these souls that have existed for a long time being squeezed into these itty-bitty bodies. And so it's an uncomfortable transition for them, poor things. So anyways, I was talking to this Mormon guy, and he started questioning me about heaven. And he said, what do you think heaven's going to be like then? Because in his mind, he's thinking, when we get to heaven, we get to be a god, right? And what's the purpose if we're not going to be gods and rule over our own planets, right? And so he wants to see if we have anything comparable to offer. And even though, that might sound like a great thing to the mind of a fallen individual, and seem to be superior to the Christian notion that our entire existence will be caught up in, glorifying God and enjoying him forever, that's because they have a very limited concept of God. I'd love to go off on an excursus about the glory of growing in our knowledge of him throughout eternity and all that entails, and how impoverished our own understanding is if we don't see the wonder of that and the beauty of that. But in any case, he doesn't see that. So he's saying to me, what do you think heaven's going to be like? And I said, why are you asking me? I don't claim to have ever been there, right? Now, of course, I do claim to know something of what heaven will be like. I claim to know what Scripture reveals about it, because Scripture comes from God. God alone has, infallible knowledge of what the eternal state will be like. But the point that I was making is that on his assumptions as a Mormon, he should already know what heaven's like because he claims to have already been there, right? So he's not even being consistent with his own presuppositions. He's actually thinking and speaking more in terms of the Christian view of things, which is that we haven't been there, right? And therefore have to get knowledge of it from outside of ourselves, as opposed to just being able to look within ourselves and say, what was our experience like in heaven? Well, so the same thing would necessarily apply to Islam. If we were all brought forth from Adam's loins, then we should have some recollection of that. Otherwise, how does this actually work as a adequate grounds to say everybody should know that there's only one God and it's Allah, right? If there's this event that's intended to communicate that to us so that we don't ever transgress that, why is it nobody ever remembers it? What's the point of taking people out of Adam's loins only to make them forget about it, right? That's not a very sensible notion on which to ground this idea of fitra. But here's the point of this. There are various hadith that go into the detail of how Allah took us out of Adam. It says that Allah stroked Adam's back with his right hand. And he first brought out all of those descendants that were destined for paradise. And then he stroked his back again and brought out all of those descendants of Adam that were destined for hell. And there you've got, by the way, the Islamic concept of fatalism, right? The notion that Allah has fatalistically decreed who goes to heaven or hell, which is very different than the Christian concept of predestination, which Paul mentions in Ephesians 1 and Romans 9 and other places. But notice this, by the way, as an aside. How many of you have heard where Muhammad says semen comes from? Where does it proceed from? All right, I see a little bit of Sam talk. I don't know what you guys are talking about, so I'll just sort of skip over that because I don't want to comment on something I don't have any clue that you're talking about. All right, so George here has given the right answer. George has pointed out that according to the Quran, semen proceeds from between the backbone and the ribs, right? According to the Islamic sources. So now put this together. Why do you think when Allah takes Adam's descendants out of him, he strokes his back? Right? Now you see the reason for that, right? I mean, you see how this fits together, right? Muhammad said semen proceeds from between the backbone and the ribs. Here's Allah taking people out of Adam, and he does so by stroking Adam's back. But this goes back to the whole discussion about the fact that Allah is literally portrayed as having hands. Now I've given you at least 4 lines of evidence that Allah has hands, according to the traditions of Muhammad, interpreting Quranic statements about Allah's hands. And there's so many other things that I could get into that further confirm this. In fact, here's one of my favorites. This is one of my favorite things. You have certain hadiths that say that Allah created Adam on his form. Now, when the Bible talks about God creating Adam in his image, that's not intended to mean a physical image, right? God is spirit. Those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. God says in Jeremiah 23, do not I fill heaven and earth? Obviously, there's not a body filling heaven and earth. God is immaterial. right? He's everywhere present without being contained by anything, right? Without being confused with anything. Even though he's everywhere present, he isn't the same thing as the objects that we can see and touch. So the Bible teaches that God is spirit and immaterial and invisible, unless he chooses, unless he wills to make himself known. Well, so when Scripture says that God created man in his image, there are various things that are involved in that. But one of the main things is that it refers to the spiritual nature of man, right? You read in the epistles of Paul, like Ephesians 4, Colossians 3, that Paul speaks of the fact that we're being transformed back into the divine image, or back into the divine likeness. And he's talking in the context about sanctification. He's talking about our transformation, or our being conformed to the image of Christ, right? He's not talking there about God changing our physical appearance, right? There is going to be a future resurrection, but what Paul is talking about in these passages where he's mentioning that God is transforming us into the divine likeness, the divine image, he's talking about our spiritual and the inner man, right? And so, but the Bible is very clear that God is spirit, and it's not communicating in Genesis 1 that God created man in a way that resembles his physical appearance. Well, Muhammad apparently understood some of that quite literally. Again, he's a pagan. He's filtering things that he hears from Jews and Christians through his pagan lenses. All he's familiar with are embodied beings and embodied deities and gods and so forth. And so he come to this conclusion that Allah is a physical being. When it says that Allah created Adam in his own form and shape, literally says shape, by the way, it was clearly understood by Muhammad as a reference to Allah literally having a form and shape. Well, the reason why this is so interesting, this is the thing that I wanted to bring up. There's a narrations in Al-Tabari in his history, or his tafsir, where he says that when Allah created Adam, he first created him as a lifeless statue, right? So he formed the mud, the clay, whatever, whichever verse of the Quran you want to go with, because the Quran gives different answers to this, right? What Adam was made of. But so Allah forms Adam's body, a statue, 90 feet tall, right? Because Adam was 90 feet tall, of course, right? And so there's this statue, and he leaves it standing for 40 years, okay? During this time, the angels come upon this statue, and initially they're afraid, okay? The angels are all afraid of this statue. Now, why would they be afraid? That's what you have to be asking yourself. Satan appears with them, but Satan is, according to this hadith, apparently a consummate detective, because Satan devises this plan how he's going to figure what's going on here, right? He goes over to the statue, and it says that he goes into its mouth and then exits through its butt, right? So he goes in through its mouth and out through its butt. And then he goes back to the angels and he says, "Don't worry, fellas." This is my paraphrase. "Don't worry, fellas. That thing is hollow, but your Lord is solid. Your Lord is solid." In other words, he's saying, this is not your Lord, right? And the proof of that is I was able to enter its mouth and exit its rear, okay? And you can't do that with Allah, because Allah is solid. He has no cavity, right? He has no ability. You can't go inside and exit through his rump. And that's why you got various, these are, there are certain sects in the early history of Islam where you had Muslims saying that Allah is solid from the waist down, right? So he has a chest cavity because he has to be able to speak. He has an opening in his mouth. He has a mouth cavity. How else can he speak? Allah's word, the Quran, is his eternal speech. So he's got to have a mouth cavity, right? You had other Muslims who located where the solid part begins and so forth. It almost reminds me of like a genie. You know how the genie appears with a solid upper half, and then he's got like that ghost-like bottom half in Aladdin's lamp on occasion. Anyways, so that's what it says in the Hadith. And so the reason they were alarmed when they saw this statue is because it looked like Allah, right? So there's another example of how the Islamic sources teach that Allah is an embodied being. Now, this creates just so many difficulties. It's just astounding to me. Now, I was talking to you. You'll notice that I go off on all sorts of tangents, but hopefully you can sort of see how these things come together, and they even if I seem to be going in a bunch of different ways, the plan is always to kind of come back and tie these things together. Well, in the early period of Islam, the Traditionist School accepted all of these hadiths, and they accepted them at face value. They said, we accept these hadiths as meaning exactly what they sound like they're saying, right? Well, after them arose a group of people known as the Mu'tazili. The Mu'tazili were philosophically minded Muslims. These were Muslims who began to read the Greek philosophers and other things of that sort. And what they started to say was, no, we've got to reinterpret this stuff because that's just patently stupid, right? The idea that the God who made heaven and earth has a body doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't make any sense, does it? How can Allah be the creator of the space-time continuum, right? You can't have a body without space, right? And you also need time. Time is measured by the movement of bodies in it. I mean, there's just all these things that are preconditions for the existence of a body, something with dimensions and all of that. And so if Allah created, then it would have to mean that space existed coeval with him. Coeval doesn't mean, that's not EVIL, it's EVAL, COEVAL, meaning eternally with him at the same time as him, right? So that would presuppose that there was an environment that Allah had before he ever created things. And so Allah isn't the ultimate source of everything. There are at least these preconditional things that existed along with him. And you even have hadiths that seem to indicate that. It says, before Allah there was nothing, right? And his throne was over the waters. Sometimes Muslims miscite this hadith and they say that Allah existed before there was anything, right? But that's not what it says. It says before Allah there was nothing. It doesn't say there was nothing with him at that time. The hadith literally says there was nothing before Allah, and his throne was over the water, meaning at that time. So there was throne in water. And I even have Muslims saying that, right? I have Muslims in videos, actually, on Acts 17, videos of Muslims actually saying that Allah existed coevally, coextensively with these other things, environment, atmosphere, clouds, and so forth. And so this Mu'tazili school of thought came along and started saying, no, that can't be true, so we have to reinterpret these things. And this created a serious tension between the Traditionist school and the Mu'tazili, and it led to severe persecution. Muslims like to claim that their doctrine of God has always been uniform and agreed upon. However, these two factions became intense rivals, and even so much so that the Traditionist school was virtually wiped out. And you have these stragglers who are holding on, men like Ahmed bin Hanbal, the one whose Musnad I was talking about earlier. Ahmed bin Hanbal is the one who was kind of one of the last holdouts saying, no, we're going to hold to these prophetic traditions. We're going to say that they're to be understood literally, and we're just going to accept them without trying to explain them, because we're just going to follow Muhammad blindly, and that's not intended to be pejorative. Muslims, that's how they express it. We follow Muhammad blindly, meaning we don't question what he said. We don't try to reason about it. We just accept it, right? So the Traditionist school comes along, and they actually gain ascendancy from the 8th to 10th century. That was the major position in Islamic circles, and they persecuted the Traditionists. This should sound similar to you as Christians, because we have in our own history a period where, there was doctrinal disputes in the early history of the church, and we believe that the truth was vindicated at Nicaea. It wasn't originated there. It didn't come into being at Nicaea. It wasn't imposed on people by the emperor. In fact, the emperor reversed himself later and became an Arian, and tried to impose it on Christians. But Muslims like to pretend that the Trinity was invented at Nicaea and refuse to look at the actual history that shows that Christians had always believed in the deity of Christ, the personhood and deity of the Spirit, long before Nicaea, consistently up to Nicaea. And what's happening at Nicaea is rather they're combating a newborn heresy, right? The novel views of Arius. But they have in their own history this same sort of thing. And too many people don't know this. Too many Muslims don't know this. Too many Christians don't know this. They should be returning the favor to Muslims. But anyways, so the Traditionist school is being combated by the Mu'tazili, which is the philosophical type school. And then out of this comes what's known as the Ash'ari school. The Ash'aris, the original Ash'aris, right? A lot of Sunni Muslims claim to be Ash'ari. The original Ash'ari school was basically a kind of compromise position between Ahmed bin Hanbal's view and the Mu'tazili, right? By the way, the Mu'tazili said Allah has no attributes, right? Because they said he's absolutely one. If you say Allah has attributes, then you're being like Christians. You're affirming plurality for Allah. So not only does Allah not have physical attributes, he doesn't have any attributes. Right. And there are Muslims today who will say that as well. I mean, that's, don't let any Muslim lie to you and tell you that they're uniform in their doctrine of God, that the Quran's doctrine of Tawheed is simple. They've been disputing this since the beginning. Right. So the Ash'ari position, the original position was to say Allah has everything attributed to him in the Quran and the Sunnah. We accept it. Right. We accept that he has all the attributes, including face, eyes, hands, shin, and so forth. But we refuse to say how. We don't explain how he has them, we don't try and delve into the meaning of it. We just accept it. We don't try and reinterpret these things and explain them away. We just say, bila khaif, meaning he has hands, they're literal hands, their modality, we don't try and explain that. We just accept it because Muhammad says it. So that was what the original Ash'aris taught. Later, the Ash'ari position came to be associated with those who try and spiritualize those anatomical features. They don't just say we don't know how he has those things and how it makes sense to say he has those things without it contradicting all these other things that it would mean they're contradicting. They said, no, we're going to reinterpret these things. We're going to assign to him purely spiritual qualities and reinterpret any anatomical type of attribute in a figurative sense, right? So Allah's hands means his power. His face refers to his being, his person, and so on and so forth. So all of that was just to kind of talk about Muhammad Hijab's blunder in that debate because somebody brought it up. And I may have had some other things I wanted to bring up in there, but I lost sight of them. Okay, Sahih Luke, I'm scrolling back and I see that Sahih Luke says, can you spell out, let me see, can you spell out that specific group, please? Oh, okay. So I assume you're talking about the Mu'tazili. So it's spelled in different ways. It depends on how you're using it in the sentence. So you have, I'm trying to send it there, Mu'tazili. I put it in the chat, Mu'tazila and Mu'tazilism. You can spell it in basically when you're referring to the position, you say Mutazilism. I mean, if you're just going to say it in English, I mean, I came to say it the way Arabs say it, not because I know any Arabic. I mean, I do pick up Arabic because the more I hear Muslims, you just keep picking things up. But because I've heard so many lectures from Muslims on how they pronounce that word, I tend to pronounce it that way. But I'm not one of those guys who advocates trying to sound, like pronouncing everything in Arabic ways. But there are certain terms, if you just hear them so often, you just kind of pronounce them the way they're normally heard. And so in this case, they would say Mu'tazili, Mu'tazila, Mu'tazilism. But in English, you just say Mutazilism, Mutazila, right? Mutazili. And you can find, in fact, I've got whole books on it around here somewhere. This is a book actually written against that position by a Muslim. It's called The Attributes of God, and it's written by Ibn al-Jawzi. And what's interesting about Ibn al-Jawzi is he was a later proponent of the Hanbali madhab. So I said that Ahmed bin Hanbal was someone who held to the literal interpretation of these narrations. And most of those who believe this happen to be Hanbalis in creed, right? There are other Muslims who believe it too, but for the most part, they're Hanbalis. And but this guy is sort of an exception. He's trying to get rid of this in his own madhab because he was trained in that madhab. And remember, the madhab is like a particular school of thought, school of jurisprudence, and sometimes is also associated with Akita. So he's trying to refute this. But what's great about this book is you end up getting 2 for 1 because he's quoting a lot of these early Hanbali scholars and trying to refute them. And he brings forward narrations that you don't even find in like Bukhari or Muslim, and trying to give an interpretation to them. But then this is a book by Hamza Yusuf. Hamza Yusuf is a contemporary Ash'ari, so he doesn't hold the Hanbali approach, and certainly not the early Ash'ari position, which was a mediating or compromise position. He holds the later Ash'ari position, which just spiritualizes all of his attributes. But he's got these great, devastating admissions in here. For example, he has quotes, or he has statements from the Mu'tazili accusing Ash'aris, which is the dominant position in Islam, accusing Ash'aris of being polytheists for believing that Allah has a plurality of attributes. So all of that is just so incredibly useful. All right, so let me check the comments here. Yeah, Truth Defenders there has given you the spelling with the little hyphen. That's how you'll often see it, or whatever you call it there. Oh, somebody's asking, what is the announcement? Thanks for telling me. Thanks for telling me. Yeah, so what I was thinking of doing, I haven't fully formulated all my thoughts on this yet, but what I thought of doing is having a regular show. Maybe I may at some point do 2 shows, but I'm thinking I've got a couple of different ideas for a regular show that I want to do. One show is a show that works through the doctrines of the Bible, right? So I would begin discussing the doctrine of Scripture, and there we would talk about the concept of revelation, general revelation, special revelation. Under special revelation, we'd talk about things like, prophethood, and of course, the inscripturation of the prophetic word, the issue of canon, the transmission of the text, why the canon includes the books we include in it, but excludes things like the Apocrypha, the sufficiency of Scripture, why it's the sole sufficient source of all we need to know for life and godliness. I would talk about other things related to the doctrine of Scripture, the authority on which we receive it, how we come to know that it's true, that sort of thing. And then move from the doctrine of Scripture to the doctrine of God, talk there about God's names and attributes, talk about the persons of the Trinity, of course, talk about everything related there to the doctrine of God, then move to things like God's decrees, God's works of creation, his work of providence, his upholding and governing the world, and then move all the way through the doctrines of the Bible, however long that takes. So that was one. Yeah, Jamie, I'd love to do some debates too. That would, I could always sort of, throw them in, as sort of like if I have a regular Friday thing, we could say this week we're gonna do a debate instead, and maybe I'll figure out how to actually get people's calls and be able to put them on this program, but. I'm going to comment on Bo Rudder's thing here in a minute. I just don't want to lose track of my thoughts here. And pardon me, folks, if I'm not seeing all your comments. There's probably many that I didn't see, and it's not because I'm ignoring anyone. It's just because I don't really look at the chat too much. It's not how I roll. I don't think as well. Looking at that, I like staring off into space. It's where all my good ideas come from. So that's one thought is to, as far as debates though, I like doing the debates. I still do videos, my major videos and stuff for David. This is just because, I have some additional time as well, and David doesn't go on at this time. So I'm on, but the debates on David's channel are good because he gets, of course, more viewers. I've never tried to build up my own channel. I've always done stuff over there. And so if I do it here, maybe it'll get a few hundred, but it's not going to get like 20,000 like the debates normally get. So I normally get 20,000. My last video, which was a collage of Muslim scholars contradicting themselves on the Quran, that one got 70,000. So I was pleased with that. Why does your beard make you look like a majestic wolf prowling through the Alaskan wilderness? I don't know. I kind of like that sort of shaved, incomplete beard look. Normally I have a goatee, right? And I was growing out my beard just because, COVID lockdown. I'm not getting out as much. It hasn't meant, the need to be too presentable. And so I've just sort of let it grow, but then I shaved it the other day. I mean, just shaved with a like a hair clipper, right? I didn't intend to make it smooth or anything. So yeah, but then I kind of liked it, I wasn't liking the way the beard was growing in when it was fuller. So when I shaved it, this has a kind of, I think, I had a Unitarian not long ago when I was going to do a debate with a Unitarian. They posted a picture of me saying, this is the guy that's going to debate. And this other Unitarian comes on there and he says, he looks like some guy that, he looks like some drunk guy that just got beat up at the bar. And, I laughed. I thought it was funny. I don't think he intended it to be funny. I mean, I don't think he intended it to be taken as funny by me. I think he was trying to insult me, but I have thick skin, so that doesn't bother me. But I kind of like the beard. That's what I'm getting at here. So I do have a debate coming up August 22nd. I believe that's a Saturday. A little over a week away. It'll be on Act 17 Apologetics YouTube page. Tune in, don't forget. Okay, so that was my first idea. I'll probably put in the description box the timestamp for when I brought up the announcement so that people that are coming in looking for the announcement will be able to find it without, maybe I'll just leave it like that. So people have to listen through all of that prior stuff. Maybe that'll be good for click-through rate. But anyways, so the first idea was doing something like that, because and one of my concerns is, one of my reasons for doing this is, if you know me, at least, I've spent a lot of time talking about the Trinity, a lot of time talking about the deity of Christ, and for good reason, right? The Trinity is fundamental to the Christian faith. The Trinity is the point of attack for many non-Christians, right? That's their go-to issue. And I don't think that Christians are adequately built up on this issue. And so, need to fend off the wolves, need to evangelize the lost. If this is a stumbling block to people coming to Christ, then it needs to be articulated and defended. Christians need to be prepared on how to do this, so they're not at a loss for how to do so. Muslims shouldn't be getting away with murder, thinking that this is Christianity's Achilles heel when it's really Christianity's strength. By the way, I'm supposed to debate Shabir Ali coming up here in a month or two, and I'm going to show you why it's Islam's Achilles heel. And so that's one. So I've been talking about the Trinity and the deity of Christ a lot, but I realize that this also sort of leaves a hole. Part of the reason for defending it is because you don't have Christianity without the Trinity. You don't have Christianity without the deity of Christ. But the intention is never to, make people one or two issue people, right? It's not like the doctrine of our, it's not like our faith is simply one or two doctrines, right? This is part, the Trinity permeates everything, though. And so it is important. You don't have the same gospel without the Trinity, right? The gospel that we believe is what it is precisely because God is triune, right? Just take the deity of Christ. If you don't have a divine Christ, then you have a very different gospel. It's no accident. If you look at all of these other cults that deny the deity of Christ, they all have a different gospel, right? Every single one of them that deny the deity of Christ have a different gospel. So a lot of them will say that Christ's death, a lot of them, you may not know this, you may never even get into it with them, but some of them say that Christ's atonement, they might say Christ died for us, he atoned for our sins. All they mean by that, for many of them, is there's what's called the moral government theory, that Jesus died in order to set a good example, or that's the example motif, right? They say he set a good example for us. Others say that Jesus died because he wanted to basically change the way we think about life and there's just all these different views. The Jehovah's Witnesses say that Jesus was a one-to-one substitute for Adam, right? So it's not that he died for all the sins of all of his people. It's that Jesus died simply to cancel out Adam's debt. And then what that means is you're sort of left to go from there, right? Because it's not sufficient that you're just absolved of Adam's sin. Now you've got to sort of work to procure your own entrance into heaven. And so they're always works-oriented, works-righteousness gospels. So none of that's a mistake. They don't have a divine Christ dying for their sins. They don't have a divine Christ placating the infinite wrath of the Father. And that's because he's not a divine Christ, right? So you can't have that same doctrine of the atonement. You can't have Jesus bearing the infinite weight of the wrath of God upon himself in a finite period of time, unless he's an infinite person, right? He has to be infinite in order to do that. And that's not just, sometimes Unitarians say you're just asserting that. Scripture nowhere says that, but Scripture does say that. We can prove that in any number of ways. I'm not going to do that now, but the fact is, the Christian gospel is what it is because our doctrine of God, our doctrine of Christ is what it is. But if we don't teach people all the doctrines of our faith, then we've done one thing well, but we've still left them open to being subverted in other areas. And Muslims, of course, need to hear the gospel. They need to hear what Christ did on the cross. Not just that Christ died because they deny the crucifixion, most of them, but what Christ was doing on the cross, and therefore the significance of the resurrection and the necessity of faith in him, and all the other things that come with that: justification by faith, right? Sanctification, adoption, all these other glorious truths of the gospel. And besides that, it's not just out of an apologetic interest that I want to do this, right? Although I spend a lot of time focusing on apologetics issues, it's not like this is the be all and end all of the Christian life. When I get to heaven, I'm not going to be refuting cultists, right? So I better be living for something more than simply this. I do this because, I'm seeking to defend the truth of Christ. I'm seeking to protect the Christian faith, Christians from the attacks of Muslims. I'm also seeking to show Muslims the truth. I'm seeking to see Muslims converted to Christ. But that's the end goal, right? We're trying to bring people to the worship of the true God through his Son by his Spirit. And so our goal here is much, it goes much further than simply wanting to engage in apologetic or polemical wranglings with people. And these are the doctrines, that are supposed to shape our thinking, shape our life. They're supposed to determine, how we view the world, all things in it, how we're supposed to live in it, and that sort of thing. So I have a number of reasons for wanting to do that. And then I had a couple of other ideas for shows to do. So one would be the doctrinal one, working through the doctrines of the Christian faith. I could, as somebody mentioned, have periodic debates, have somebody come on and do debates. That's usually when I'm at my most animated. I love to debate. If you haven't caught that before, when I enter into a debate, I feel like if you've ever watched Over the Top, I don't know how many of you have seen Over the Top with Sylvester Stallone, but in the movie, Sylvester Stallone is a truck driver and he competes in arm wrestling competitions, and his guns are kind of like mine. I'm not going to show you my guns right now because I don't want to frighten anyone, but that was facetious, of course. But so he's an arm wrestler. He competes in arm wrestling competitions. And whenever he's getting in the zone, he's about ready to arm wrestle with someone, he takes his hat and he turns it around. At one point in the movie, he tells his son it's kind of like turning on a light switch, right? He's like getting into the zone. And so for me, when I engage in debate, the Lord is gracious to me, enables me to bring whatever gifts I have to bear, but also gives me that spiritual energy that I need to engage in that task. And so I love to debate, so I'll probably do some of that. But there was another thing I was thinking of doing, and maybe working through a book of the Bible. Maybe I'll have a certain episode dedicated to Islamic issues or apologetics issues or something like that. And of course, people can always ask questions. All right, so Bo Rudder asked, did you see Shabir Ali on Kenny Bomer's channel 2 nights ago? So I did not see that. And what's interesting here, though, is I actually, some time ago, I don't remember exactly when, but I have it in my discussions log on Facebook. I'm not friends with Kenny Bomer on Facebook, or it might have been email. It's in one of the two, and I just have to look. But somehow I was talking with him, and I challenged him to debate. And at the time, there was a reason I challenged him to debate, and he just kept making excuses. So I let it go. Well, recently I caught Kenny Bomer on a program done by Eric Smith and Chris Claus. And I was able to, mix it up with him a little bit. It wasn't a full debate, but I got like a 10-minute back and forth with him. And my hope was, we had a cordial discussion. I was disagreeing with him, showing him why he's wrong. My hope was that maybe this would make it more desirable for him to do a debate. And after that, Chris Claus asked him if he would debate me. And then Kenny Bomer says, oh, I don't even know who he is, right? And I thought, oh my goodness, He knows who I am, right? I challenged him to debate. We had a discussion about this, so he knows who I am. This was a long time ago. But number two, he's familiar with Acts 17 apologetics. My videos are all over the site, and I've engaged numerous Muslims over the years. I've been a long-time author of Answering Islam. If he hasn't heard of me, it's not that I'm an important person. I'm just saying that, I mean, if somebody is in your face, it doesn't matter whether they're important or not. Again, that's not what I'm saying here about me, but you still have to have known who they are. Besides that, he interacts with and has people on his show who have interacted with me, right? And more than a little bit. So, so after Chris Claus was talking to him, then he said, "Oh, I know who he is, right? Shabir mentioned him the other day." So he says he only knows of me from this incidental, offhanded remark that Shabir made. And so Shabir had mentioned that we're going to debate, and we are. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, Tippy Bear says Kenny is a waste of space. I'm willing to debate anybody who's willing. And it's not me picking on anyone, right? If somebody says he's not competent, because I'm willing to debate anyone. If the ones that they consider big league would step up, I'd be happy to debate them. But I do know from having seen some things that Kenny does that he's not a person with much integrity. I haven't watched CP a lot. I know a lot of people do, but one of the few times I have, Kenny called into his show and he was pretending to not be a Muslim, and other people caught him on it. They caught him pretending like he's not a Muslim in order to try and trap and undermine what CP was saying. So I don't think the man has a lot of integrity, but I'd still debate him. I don't have any ill feelings towards him. I mean, oh yeah, Tony. Somebody said would love to see you with Tony Costa. So Tony Costa is awesome. I love Tony. He's a good brother, a good soldier of Christ. We've done a number of things together over the years, and actually, before I ever did anything publicly engaging Muslims, I used to read. I've always read stuff on Islam, but I ran across Tony's work in the midst of all that at one point. And so it was a joy to eventually meet him, and then also get an opportunity to do some work with him. So Gerald Perry says, Tim Conway has a pretty good video addressing this question, so I don't know what that's in reference to. Scripture Explained says, was Aquinas' view on Muhammad accurate? I'm not sure that I know everything he said about Muhammad, but in the main, it's accurate. One thing that's interesting, I just say about a lot of earlier Christian writers, not a lot, but I mean, certainly Christian writers in the West, we're in a privileged position at this point because a lot more works from the Arabic have been translated into English. Earlier people in the West didn't have the same access that we have, right? So a lot of what they were going on was based on a much more limited pool of data, and maybe reports that they heard, people who came from those parts of the world. They were in a very different position than we are, and so when they do get some things right, it's remarkable. Even if they get something wrong, it's understandable if they do. But the statement of Aquinas that I'm familiar with is only about a paragraph long. He lists a number of things, and they're basically correct. So that's remarkable. But what's interesting is, so a lot of Eastern Christians have been in a better position to know about Islam. You had John of Damascus in the 7th century, into the 8th, where he was actually in an Islamic context, right? A context that Islam had conquered his land, and so he's in close contact with Islam. Plus, he knew Arabic, right? So he's an especially good resource when it comes to Islam. If you haven't seen my video on Acts 17 apologetics called "Mutilating Allah," you should go check that out. The video called "Mutilating Allah." Probably the only video on YouTube by that title. In there, I think I extend John of Damascus' insights, but his insights were seminal insights into a problem that's deeply at the heart of Islam. And so Skate Master says, is John O here? I wonder if that's the John O from Las Vegas. Is that Johnny O? Let's see what he says. If that's the Johnny O I'm thinking of, then that's a longtime friend of mine. Gosh, I'd have to say it goes back over 20 years. So Truth Defender said, where do you fall on the David Wood versus Robert Spencer debate on the history of Mo? I fall midway to Spencer's side over David. Yeah, so in some sense, it's not an issue that I've considered necessary to come to a firm conclusion on for a number of reasons. I mean, my interest in Islam, like yours, I know, is refuting it as a devilish lie, because it's that which people hold to in opposition to Christ, right? It's that by which those particular people are suppressing the truth. Every ungodly person is suppressing the truth, but what they're using to suppress it may be different in each case. In the case of Muslims, it's Islam. So I have a goal to refute the falsehood of Islam. And so to me, if one accepts the Islamic narrative about Muhammad, you accept the basic narrative that you find in the Sirah, that you find in the Hadith, I find all of that damning, right? I find it so incredibly potent in refuting Muhammad that I almost don't want it to be unreliable, right? I mean, it's almost like, give me more of that, right? It doesn't matter to me if, they've got all these sources that they claim can authentically be traced back to Muhammad in terms of these narrations. If these narrations are telling me that he bedded a prepubescent girl, stole the wife of his adopted son, mistreated a blind man, had some woman assassinated because she insulted him by making a poem that was derogatory towards him, who tortured people for money, who beheaded Jewish tribes in order to take their wives and land, who bedded the wives of captive women even while their husbands were still alive, who engaged in muta. I mean, for me, that is devastatingly bad information. Oh, hey, how's it going, Hatune? Good to see you. I forgot that this time for you is morning. For me, it's morning, but it's 2 a.m. So in that sense, I'm saying I don't have a problem accepting that narrative because I think it's devastating to Islam, which is my ultimate goal as far as is interacting with Muslims. On the other hand, I do think if you look at stuff that Spencer's saying, things aren't so nice and pretty, right, as Muslims would like to tell us. In the first place, Muslims are the ones so often who are calling into question their own hadith narrations, right? So it's almost like they're begging us to start going this route ourselves. But Spencer brings up numerous good reasons to find a lot of these things to be suspect, right? We don't have a lot of information we would expect to have and should have if the Islamic account of things are true. The information is much later. And there's just so many things, stuff that Jay Smith is talking about, stuff that Hatune is talking about. So in terms of that question, and I should have put it up here on the screen. Let me go back and put it up so everybody knows what I'm talking about. So what I'm saying is, either way, I think it's a problem for Muslims, but it's not one that I need to commit to, right? I don't have this overwhelming need to know whether Muhammad is the person that he's portrayed to be in the Islamic sources, because it comes down to this: either he was a scurrilous individual, a wicked individual like those sources described, or he's the worst character of all fiction, right? He's the most godless wretch in terms of the religion that he proclaimed, of any person that anyone could have imagined. And so either one of those, to me, does its suits its purpose. So where did John O go? I'm wondering if this John O is somebody that I know. Oh, I see. It's a friend of Johnny O. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Okay, so McVine has said, what's your opinion on Yasrakati's holes in the narrative about the preservation of the Quran? So if you didn't see it, McVine, on the Acts 17 YouTube page, I did a collage. It's about 30 minutes long with Muslim scholars citing the standard narrative, and then other Muslim scholars coming along and contradicting them, and it goes back and forth throughout the 30 minutes. It's similar to my Where's Allah video. A long time ago, I did a video where I show Muslim scholars contradicting each other on this issue, since Muslims claim that they're uniform and they all believe the same thing, and this is clear in the Islamic sources. So I did the similar sort of thing with respect to the holes in the narrative, and I show that it's not just Yasrakati, though it is, and he's a prominent one, but Shabir Ali, another scholar named Dr. Salim. I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but Shazad Salim, I believe it is. So there are numerous other scholars who are admitting this. And of course, Mufti Abu Layth, the laughing Mufti, he's the Muslim who often laughs. He's admitting all these sorts of things. So, and I also went on a show with Hatune. I don't think it was our major focus, but we did talk a little bit about it. Oh, I did a show with David on it as well. I talked about holes in the narrative with David. And so, yeah, I mean, there's no question that there's holes in the narrative. I mean, the holes are big enough to drive a fleet of Mack trucks through, right? I mean, just we're talking problem on top of problem on top of problem. Even the attempts to get rid of the problem end up creating other problems, right? And generate problems that end up coming up down the line. But there's problems from day one. One of the excuses that Muslims make, I'll just bring this up real quickly. One of the excuses that Muslims make for why there are variants now, first, they never used to admit that there are variants, right? We're talking about textual variants, first of all, between the razm, the consonantal text, the skeleton of the Quran. There are variations there in the manuscript tradition. There are certainly differences in the Qira'at of the Quran, the different pronunciations. When you have a consonantal language where the vowels are not written in, but they're inserted mentally, right, that gives rise to the possibility of all sorts of people thinking there are different meanings to these words. And so that sort of thing created a huge issue. Well, the way Muslims try and account for all these sorts of differences and other things that could be mentioned, differences in the consonantal text, differences in the pronunciation and the resulting words, right, and their meanings, differences among those, they try and account for that by saying that Muhammad received the Quran in 7 ahruf, right? Well, the problem is that the variations, the different versions of the Quran well exceed 7 ahruf, right? 7, whatever, right? You're asking, what is an ahruf? Well, join the club, because Muslims can't agree on what an ahruf is, right? All sorts of Muslims There are up to 40 different scholarly interpretations of what an ahruf is. Okay. Some Muslims say it means dialect. Other Muslims, will give different interpretations. So that's one issue. But part of the problem is there's well more than 7 different versions of reciting the Quran, right? A lot of Westerners are in the dark because, we don't speak Arabic. But the truth is getting out there thanks to Muslims admitting it. And of course, we're also doing our homework. But the other thing is when you look at the Islamic narrations, it's pretty apparent. Maybe I'll do a whole show on this. It's pretty apparent that this is another one of Muhammad's damage control jobs, right? Very often, Muhammad, whenever he got in trouble making a mistake, forgetting something, he would come up with an ad hoc after the fact explanation that justifies it, right? Think, for example, of the satanic verses, right? In the satanic verses episode, Muhammad utters something that he's later rebuked for. He tells the Meccans that it's okay to intercede through Allah's pagan daughters or his goddess daughters. And then his followers later rebuke him, and he says, that sort of thing has happened to all prophets. Satan, while they're reciting, will sometimes cast something into their recitation. So it's Satan's fault. That's not found in any prior, prophetic story. It's not something Muhammad had ever said before. He made that up on the spot to get out of a pickle, right? Same thing with so many other things. He was constantly rebuked and corrected by the Jews, and then he'd later make up an excuse for that. Well, when you look at the Islamic sources, sometimes Muhammad forgot what he had told people. He forgot how he had revealed something to them. And so when this started getting around and certain people are coming back to him and they're saying, hey, wait, you said it to me this way. Hey, wait, you said it to me this way. Then Muhammad says, no, guys. Gabriel revealed it to me in seven different ways, right? I'm joking because there's a lot more than 7, but so he claims that Gabriel revealed it to him in 7 different ways. All these different ways mean the same thing, right? They're just synonymous ways of saying this. And again, these differences are not merely synonyms. Muhammad is claiming that he's given the same revelation in these 7 different modes. And but really, when you look at the narrations, the reason that he's coming up with this is because he goofed, he messed up, he forgot how he had originally said something, and he ends up telling people different things, and then they come to him. And one of the things that explodes the myth is, sometimes Muslims will say, well, these are just different dialects, right? Some people pronounce the same words differently, and that's all that's going on here. Well, when you look at those narrations where it's talking about people getting in a dispute and saying, hey, you showed me differently than you showed him, they're not arguing because these are just pronunciation differences, because these people come from the same tribe. They spoke the same dialect, right? So it has nothing to do with dialectical differences. We're talking about differences in wording, differences in meaning. And so Muhammad just made up this whole ahruf thing. And that's why Islamic scholars have no clue what it means, because the whole thing is bogus. In fact, I was asked earlier by truth defenders, where I come down on the debate that David did with Robert Spencer, right? If you guys don't know, David and Robert had a friendly debate on the existence of Muhammad. Spencer argued that he doesn't exist. David argued that he does. And, basically Spencer argued that Muhammad's a literary fiction. And David argued that Muhammad existed, but he's a false prophet, right? They both believe he's not a trustworthy individual. But some people would argue that this ahruf narration, which comes along much later, like so many other hadiths, are actually somebody looking at the fact that there's all these different ways of reciting the Quran that differ with each other, and they're trying to come up with an explanation for this, right? They're trying to account for this variety among these things. And so this hadith narration is another example of a concocted hadith intended to account for and justify this otherwise embarrassing fact, right? Birds sound nice too. Okay. Only reason for the Quran being the word of God. It sounds nice. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've been going on and on. Maybe I'll take a couple more questions here. And then I don't even know how long I've been on. Oh, I've been on since 12:30. So it's been almost 2 hours. So it's a good time to kind of start wrapping it up. But that was my announcement. For those that didn't catch it, I do plan to go live more often. I'm thinking of starting a dedicated series going through the doctrines of the Bible. And I'll probably also interrupt that with some occasional shows on different subjects. And but that's one of my plans. If there's a good response to that, then I'll run with it. So you guys make sure to share your votes in the comment section. Truth defenders. Was Paul practicing friendship evangelism by daily preaching to the same people or area daily? Well, no, I don't think Paul had any notion of friendship evangelism. Obviously, Paul had no problem getting down in the dirt with people, and we're told repeatedly that Paul reasoned with people, he argued with people, he debated with people. All those terms are used in the book of Acts, and it's quite obvious that what he was doing was an offense to his hearers, so much so that in 1 Corinthians he says this is a stumbling block, right, to Jews and Gentiles. And also so much so that he was the constant object of attack. So Paul definitely wasn't trying to win friends and influence people. He was trying to win people for Christ. So Samson asks, why don't you do a response video for Tobias Singer? That'd be a good idea. I may do that. That'd be good. In fact, I've wanted to debate Tobias Singer for quite a while. He makes all sorts of claims that are eminently worthy of refutation. So I may do that. And then, of course, there's a sense in which I can kill two birds with one stone. Sometimes when I debate Muslims, they'll say things like, why don't you go debate a Jew, right? And I'm thinking, because you're the one telling me that the Old Testament says this and Christianity is contrary to the Old Testament, right? Doesn't teach the Trinity. But I'd be happy to debate somebody like Tobias Singer. That way, next time a Muslim says something, I not only will get the benefit of engaging Rabbi Tobias Singer and other Jewish people that might be listening, but also I'll be able to point Muslims to that the next time they say, go talk to him. All right. McVine asks, can you do common arguments that Muslims use? That's possible. I could certainly do that. And then Hatune says, same my time, please. Yeah, you have to talk to me in email. I'll see what you mean, because I don't know. I haven't really planned a time. I don't know what time you're telling me. You're telling me to go on at 12 instead of 12:30. Is that what you're saying? Or excuse me. I'm trying to think of what you're 5 hours different from me, I think. Right? I could be wrong. Anyways, so yeah, I'll try and figure out a time that doesn't conflict with so many people. I have no intention of conflicting with other people. All right. Tobias Singer, does he debate people? That's a good question. I mean, he's debated Michael Brown before, but as far as I know, they did I'm kind of fuzzy on this, but I think they either did a second debate and then he refused to release it, or he refused to have a second debate after that. I know he won't debate him anymore. I just can't remember at what point that comes. So I know he did debate, and he'd probably think some Gentiles easy pickings. So he may be willing to debate me, and that'd be great. Oh, I see. So the issue is, Hatune, that I get off my night job at 5 your time, and it usually takes me a bit to sort of set up. After working all that time, uh, I usually have to get a drink, run to the restroom, and grab a snack. Um, but it's possible. Maybe I can do 12:10. I mean, 5:10 for you. um, oh, okay. So Tippy Bear says that he refused to release it and refused to debate again. Okay. So I knew I had heard something like that. I just wasn't sure. Yeah, Dr. Brown does a great job. I don't know if you guys saw Dr. Brown's debate with Dale Tuggy, a Unitarian, but Dale Tuggy is pretty darn smug as a Unitarian, believes that he's just got the goods on Trinitarians. And his debate with Michael Brown was the most embarrassing thing he could have ever done. Michael Brown absolutely pulverized him. And I'm surprised the guy's still, pontificating on his show. I mean, it wasn't even close, right? And it wasn't like, Dr. Brown was, just yelling or anything. He wasn't. I mean, he was just over and over with the scriptural references and refutations. He just did a masterful job. So, yeah, Sahih Luke says, took Dale to school. It was great. Yeah, so hit the share link far and wide. Yeah, thank you, people. Thanks for that. You do hit the like button. Okay, I'll take one more question, and then I need to go get something to eat. I actually feel my blood sugar dropping. Truth Defenders owes me a meal or something. Oh, I definitely should have Eddie Dalcor on. I'd be happy to have Truth Defenders on too, if he ever wants to come on. And Hatune, of course. But yeah, I definitely should do that. I'd have to come up with a good topic for us. All right. Anybody have a quick last 4 minutes here? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Quick question. Rapid fire. Get them in. This is your chance. Oh. Okay. Well, this was good. I had a chance to try the new setup. I still didn't do anything fancy, but I at least learned a couple of things. Hatune live stream. Yeah, I do. I do live stream with Hatune. I think I do. What is it, Hatune? Is it the 4th? Let me see. I mean, I'm going to be on her show again on the 29th of this month, and so I'm trying to see, is that the it's like the 4th, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5th, 4th or 5th Saturday of every month or something like that. So I go on her show once a month at least. So one of these days I'll have to have her on as well. Okay, last Saturdays of each month. Okay, I have it in my calendar. I couldn't remember because I do something for those that don't know. I also do something like this for George Saig of Ministry to Muslims. It's a Zoom platform event, and I teach in there on certain topics. So I think in 2 weeks for George, I'm teaching on the Trinity in the Old Testament. By the way, don't forget that I'm having a debate on August 22nd. I'll be debating a Unitarian. The last time I debated the angel of the Lord, the debate was, is the angel of the Lord Yahweh according to the Old Testament? Is he God? This time I'll specifically be debating, is Jesus the angel of the Lord? And so now we're getting to the heart of the issue. Right. It's one thing to prove the divinity of the angel of the Lord, but to further demonstrate that he is the pre-incarnate Christ, that's the goal. So I'll be doing that on August 22nd. All right. Well, Yeah, so let's see. Anthony Rogers, last sentence. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully the next several discussions are engaging for you. Part of the issue with me coming on at this time of night is I do have to be a little bit quieter. So, I am thinking of maybe a different time on like Fridays or Saturdays. Fridays or Saturdays, I could do it at any time. And I will do a set time, but I don't want to have to speak too low. I want people to be able to hear me. So we'll see what I do. Everybody's asleep here right now. So please define your vocabulary. Yeah. All right. So Debbie says, yes, when you do that, can you define your vocabulary? I assume you're talking to me, Debbie. I don't know if you're saying when I talk about, are you talking about in the debate that I'm going to do, or when I do the lessons, moving through scripture? But I definitely intend to define my terms in the debate with the Unitarian. All right, people. Thanks so much for coming. Happy to serve you. So I'm happy to have you and happy to be had. And I'll talk to you all next time. God bless.